The Vortex Viper PST Gen 2 5-25 by 50 is a rifle scope that you will find on almost every budget-built Bagara on the planet, and has been for quite some time. These are getting really old now, but does its age mean that it's any less potent, especially when paired against some of its more modern rivals, especially from ones from its own bloodline? Well, there's only one way to find out, so please join me on this very long, very detailed review of what could possibly be the best budget HPVO on the planet.
Ladies and gentlemen, better late than never. The Gen 2 PST Viper from Vortex, 5-25 by 50. I've been trying to get my hands on one of these for a long time, and I never really got across that deal where I was like, I can justify buying this. And no one's offered to send one in for review, so I had to buy one. It wasn't until a gentleman had one for trade that was looking for something that I had straight up. And at that point, I'm not losing money, I'm not gaining money. I am, however, gaining an optic I haven't reviewed before. With that being said, I have had the chance to look through one of my friend Joe's MOA 5-25 sheesh about 4 or 5 years ago. And I had to say, back then I was blown away. And there's a reason why you see on Reddit, everyone's got a Bagara B14 and a PST Gen 2. It's like the Cheeto match made in heaven. They just fucking work. And they're relatively inexpensive, all things considered. Especially now. I've seen these go for like the $600-700 price point. Meanwhile, when these things first came out, good luck finding one under $800. And for a lot of people, that's a lot of money for something that's made in the Philippines. And I completely understand and respect that. However, back then it was still less than half the price of its large brother, the Razor HD Gen 2 4.5-27. However, just like their 1-6 siblings, can this PST Gen 2 even hold up a little bit of a candle to its big brother, the Razor HD? Well, that's what we're here to find out. First and foremost, going over the box is pretty simple standard stuff. This has the 2C reticle, the exact same that is in my Razor. So when it's time to do a head-to-head with this, it should be pretty straightforward and easy. I'm not going to go too crazy with this, because I reviewed the 3-15 quite some time ago, and I love the 3-15. I don't have it here on my table to showcase to you guys, only because it's on long-term loan to my brother. Anyway, sunshade included, very nice. Foam on this, not as good as some of the newer foam that we've seen, especially on like the Gen 2 Strike Eagle 1-6 or 1-8. I already took it out of the sleeve. We do have some scope caps. They are not the Defender scope caps, which are these guys. These are among the best scope caps, with the exception of maybe Tenebrex, but that's the story for another time. These are just their standard Vortex ones. Don't torque it over 18 inch-pounds or we'll kill you. Battery, Allen key, booklet. We don't really need to go over much of that because there's not a whole lot to this scope that requires special attention. And I think that's why this scope has been so prominent in the mid-budget territory builds for as long as it has. It's just really simple and it works. No, there is no throw lever that comes with it. You will need to buy a throw lever if you want one on this. You can get them from Vortex, or you can get them from MK Machining, or you can get one of this little breakaways for like $6 that are just freaking fantastic. So yeah, you need to buy a throw lever. Not the end of the world. There are some fairly inexpensive options. Besides that though, they're just really, really nice looking optics. Starting at the back, fast focus eyepiece on this, you could see has seen its fair share of love from the previous owner. I don't know if this is just skookum. I don't know if he had this thing taped up or something, but it shouldn't interfere with how well this thing should perform. All the way out, quarter turn in, there is some wiggle on this, it must be said. Up and down ain't bad, but side to side, there is noticeable wiggle. I absolutely would run scope caps on this just to prevent this thing from rotating. It does rotate fairly easily. You could hear the seal writing on the inside. But at the end of the day, it's just a fast focus eyepiece. There isn't much we could really expect. From there, we're going to check out the magnification ring. 5-25. Whoa. I'm hitting everything today. You can see we're past 180 degrees. So if you do have to go from minimum to maximum or back and forth, get a throw lever. You're going to really need it. Magnification ring, Doesn't surprise anybody. Very smooth, quiet, and well damped. On to the battery compartment, and this is what Vortex got right. For their mid-range and higher stuff, they give you a cap that's recessed inside from the knob itself, so you don't have to worry about this thing coming undone when you don't want it to. Hold the outside, get in there with a coin. I could already feel the positive engagement from the O-ring for this weather sealing. Pull it off. You can see we have a beautiful compartment inside. 2 springs in the inside, 2 for 6 prongs that are going to hold positive pressure on the battery, a big old rubber stop on the cap itself, and it spins with the dial, yeah, but again, once you lock this up, this won't come undone unless you want it to. The illumination knob itself goes from 1 to 10 with offs in between. Very positive click. Very aggressive splines on the outside, nice and sharp, but it's a little hard to get purchase on there. As sharp as it is, I still feel like my hand's slipping over it. If I grab it like this, like how I would, it's a lot easier, but trying to show you how well this thing pops into place is a little challenging. Very tight. Detent is very deep. You really got to get on there and wrench this thing into or out of its next position. Pretty damn nice. However, if I'm sweating or my hands are wet or dirty, I'm going to be sliding right off of this thing. However, the same cannot be said for the parallax adjustment. We go all the way down to 25, I believe. It should be meters, but you never know. This is not labeled, but it goes from 25, I'm going to assume, okay, fine, I'll say yards. I'll guess yards. All the way up to infinity. And as you can see, it's 270 degrees of throw. So you really have a nice finite adjustability here at any distance to get this thing perfect for your target engagement. Very smooth, good solid stop, perfectly damped. Basically the same sort of splinage that's going on here. However, it turns a lot easier than the illumination control, and it just feels fantastic. Not Razor HD good, but still very good nonetheless. From there, we're going to check out both the turrets. These do not lock. However, there is a 0 stop. You can take off the cap, adjust it however you need it. So that's really nice. Plus, unlike the Optics 6, this thing does show your rotation indicator underneath. Again, Vortex got it right. 10 mils per rotation, which should be standard across the board. I really don't know why it isn't. Very little play once you're in the detent. But tremendous feel and sound. Awesome. The same thing can be said for the windage turret. Lines up beautifully. Let's see what we have. 6, 7, about 8 mils of adjustability on the windage. I don't want to jam this thing up, but as you can see, tons of adjustment here. They feel and sound fantastic. So as you can see, there's a lot of good reasons why someone would be interested in this. But I forgot to mention it, weight is another one. This thing does not feel very heavy. In fact, for a 5 to 25 with a 30mm tube and a 50mm front objective, 31.5 ounces isn't terrible at all. Comparing it to its big brother, what is that, 31, this thing's as near as makes no difference, 20 ounces heavier. And let's say you want to buy something that performs probably as close to this, but weighs almost half the weight. Yeah, of course you're going to pick the PST. Now, however, if you wanted something, and again, I don't have the perfect magnification range, something a little more quote-unquote tactical, something like the Arken SH4 Gen 2 is still going to weigh about 8 ounces heavier. However, I don't even know if this was around when the PST first came out, but the LHT Razor, which is basically a spiritual successor to the PST in some regards, even though it's got an ADM mount on here, is still significantly lighter. So, is it the lightest thing on the bunch? No. But is it the cheapest? Well, no. The Arken's actually significantly cheaper. That thing's going for like $300 right now. I don't know how the hell they make money on those. But it's still fairly lightweight. It's definitely a justifiable weight for its price and its magnification range. Anyway, enough talking. Let's get behind this thing and see if it's still worth that crispy Cheeto on top of a Bagara.
We are looking at the EBR-2C reticle. You can get this as well as its larger brother, the Razer HD Gen 2 4.5 to 27, as well as the 3 to 18 in a bunch of different reticles, and you can match them to have the exact same reticle. Like I already said before in the physical overview section, if you skipped ahead, this is the 2C reticle, which my 4.5 to 27 also has, as well as my 3 to 15. Why that reticle as opposed to other reticles? Well, number one, I don't mind it that much, and number two, they could typically be found for a lot cheaper than, let's say, the 7D reticle options that are out there now. Because this is a first focal plane scope, as we increase the magnification, the reticle will also change size depending on where we are in the magnification range. This scope also has a constant eye relief of 3.4 inches, which is great because you don't have to worry about the Eyebox shifting too much on this thing when you start changing the magnification range. The illumination on this thing is also extremely good for an HPVO. You can see right there with the lights off, it is beautiful. It is bright, it is crisp, it is clear. It also has great steps in between its maximum to minimum brightness. So you should always be able to find the exact brightness that you need for the illumination whenever you need it. The turrets sound and feel absolutely incredible. It does have a zero stop, which is great, but if these things were locking, they would literally be perfect.
We're going to start with a mini box test. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 4 and 4, our windage is basically perfect, but our elevation looks to be about 1/10 of a mil off. Let's reset the windage. And let's continue downward. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So at 10 mils added elevation, we are 2 clicks off on our elevation gain. Take note, the reticle lines up to the target perfect, so it's not anything to do with that. It's just the erector not being properly set. Let's reset this to 0. Returns to 0 perfectly fine. Our windage is perfectly fine. Let's go up again. Turrets are excellent on these things, but again, there's our 2%, which is on the higher side of things. Returns to 0 perfectly fine. So, not the best on the elevation. The windage is okay. Let's find out if there's any slop in the erectors. We're going to go to the right, left, left, right. Not really. Let's go with the windage. Let's now move on to the elevation. We're going to go up, down, down, up. Not really any slop in the erectors on either the windage or the elevation. It's just the elevation doesn't go as well as it should. 1, 2. At least it returns to 0.
So the tracking is slightly off. It is very disappointing, but the Razer HD Gen 2s did the exact same thing, so at least they're kind of consistent. And truth be told, 2% isn't terrible once you get up to about 10 mils. Halfway, it was pretty much spot on, so it definitely does lose some above 5 mils. And again, keep in mind, this is a serving size of 1. I could do 10 scopes and probably get 10 different results. Unfortunately, we'll never know because I don't really get that many different samples of the same optics to test. So take that for what it's worth. Focusing on a 30-yard power transformer here, because the side focus on this thing goes to 25 yards and or meters, this should be a cakewalk getting this thing perfectly in focus here at 25x, and you'd be exactly right. The image here so far looks extremely good. Very minor chromatic aberration on the high contrast areas, those power lines just in front of the transformer. But honestly, beyond that, it's a wonderful looking image. We have a lot of resolution. We could pick up the Made in the USA sticker really well. You can see all the stars on the blue, and it's just perfectly fine. Let's now push our distance back to about 400 yards on our brick building, and you could see it was a very clear, bright, sunny day with very little cloud coverage. So we have very bright, direct sunlight. Creeping up the magnification range nice and slowly, you can see that the image is beautiful from minimum to maximum. Side focus was set roughly at the distance that what we are given here. I do tweak it ever so slightly to see if we can pull a little bit more out of it, and I'm delighted to say that we can. Once I get everything set up as good as possible, you can enjoy a truly wonderful looking image. Now, the reticle might not be for everybody, but like I've said, you can pick these up with almost every reticle that Vortex has ever offered in their HPVO lineup, so that is delighted to see. Again, I have this reticle in the 3-15 and with my 4.5-27 Razor HD Gen 2. I also had my 3-18 Razor, but I sold that off because I had no real use for an MPVO that weighs about as much as 16 bricks. Colors are very good. Contrast is very good. You can pick up every single brick on that face. You can see the mirage in the air above it. And again, very little to no chromatic aberration. It is a wonderful, wonderful performance. Pulling the magnification out to about 20x to give you a better representation of just how good the 25x is on this. There's almost no gain, I'll say, of sharpness or resolution or brightness to the image. From 20 to 25x, it's basically the exact same. The exit pupil will get a little bit smaller, and thus the eyebox will get a little bit smaller, but both magnifications are very capable. Pulling it back to about 15 or so x here, you can see the image does get a little bit brighter, but all things considered, not so much so that it makes the top end of the magnification range completely useless. It is, again, very impressive. Bringing the magnification back up to 25x and focusing our attention on our 900-yard power towers here, you can see the image might not be 100% super razor sharp, but it's definitely more than sharp enough. One thing I have to note is the exit pupil on this thing is a little bit on the tighter side. It claims about 2 millimeters at 25x, and that does show with the eyebox. However, it's not what I would consider unusable. You just have to be in a perfect cheek weld. There are some other scopes that will perform better than this, and some that will perform much worse. But as long as you have a good solid cheek weld, you will be fine. However, at 25x, it will be much harder to get behind this thing in a position that is less rigid, less stable. So if you are going to be shooting this thing from varying positions, definitely use lower magnification. But if you're already a shooter that does that, you already know that you'll probably keep it between 12 to 15x anyway on the top end. Bringing it down to about 20x, you can see there is a slight improvement, but only slight. Bringing it down to about the halfway mark, it will improve, but the minimum exit pupil on this thing, or rather the largest exit pupil at the minimum magnification at 5x, is only rated at about 10 millimeters, which you will see in the comparison segment a little bit later on is still quite small. However, it is quite forgiving, and the image stability as far as the sharpness to the image before you get completely off in the shadows and can't see through it is still pretty good. Both the reticle and the image maintain a very high level of sharpness, which means that even if you're not 100% perfectly behind it, as long as you can see through it, you should be able to make a hit. There also doesn't seem to really be a parallax issue, which is when the image looks like it's shifting off your reticle at the distance that you have your parallax set to. So it's pretty stable in that regard, which is very nice. To let that small exit pupil live for you a little bit more, I'm going to show you a more dynamic roll from 5 to 25 with the illumination on full in a more twilight area, or twilight time rather. And you can see at 5x it is a little bit on the small side. You can dance around with it a little bit, but it's nowhere near as capable as some MPVOs that we're looking at in the 3 to 18 magnification range. I'm not going to be making any comparisons to those here, but just know that, well, the more magnification you have, typically the smaller the exit pupil and tighter the eyebox. Here at about 15x, you can see it is much tighter. Keep in mind, though, that it's also much darker outside, so thus With your naked eye, your eye pupil might get larger than the exit pupil and thus give you this weird sort of blackened line when you're looking through the scope. It's really unnoticeable on a camera because when you're filming, or at least when I'm filming with a fixed f-stop, so a fixed iris, it never really shows up as it would to the naked eye. So again, take this with a grain of salt. It seems okay enough here on camera, but to the naked eye, especially in failing light, it will be much worse. 20x seems significantly tighter again because of the failing light, and it's a pretty small exit pupil, but nothing compares to its maximum magnification exit pupil of about 2 millimeters, like I said earlier, where you got to be perfectly dead on with it. And this is with, again, a fixed camera setting where I guarantee you your eye pupil will be much larger than what the camera is seeing. So not the best performance in that regard. Moving on to 1,000 yards. We have it currently set at 0 added mils of elevation. There is a lot of mirage in the air, so the image might seem a little bit softer maximum than it could on a cooler day, let's say. But I'm not going to give this thing any excuses because this is a true testament in real-world environments of how you might be using this scope. At 25x at 1,000 yards, the image is pretty good. To showcase that that's about as good of a sharp of image as we can get, I adjust the side parallax to get it, well, back to exactly where it was. I pull out the magnification to 20x before I increase the elevation to about 10 added mils. You can see the image does sharpen up a little bit at 20x, but it's not really that much of a huge difference. However, let's add 10 mils of elevation and let me showcase to you again what a small exit pupil can do to harm you. Again, at 25x, 10 mils of added elevation, the image gets darker. It gets darker because the exit pupil has shifted. It's a very small amount of light that comes through the back end of the scope at its maximum magnification. Well, even at its minimum, 10 millimeter at 5x is still pretty tight, and you'll see just how apparent that is in just a moment. But what you have to do when you bring this thing up in elevation, in higher magnification, is shift your head down ever so slightly to be able to look through the scope a little bit better. Shifting my camera mount about 1/8 of an inch will yield a much brighter looking image looking through it, as well as increase the sharpness of the image looking through it. So it is nice to see that if you do run this thing with added elevation out at distance, the image will get a little bit sharper. It's very minute, but it's just so that you could just notice it if you're really, really paying attention. Low light performance is another area where some of you are probably curious to see how well this thing performs. Just because you might have this on a more tactical rig doesn't mean you might not want to take it hunting from time to time. At 5x we have excellent light transmission, and the illumination again is wonderful for these sort of twilight time brightness settings. It is really, really nice. But again, that exit pupil is going to start really showing its ugly face in environments like this. As already stated, in lower light environments, your eye pupil is going to start to dilate and get larger than the exit pupil from the scope. So the higher up you go in magnifications, the more likely you are to have this black ring that you'll pick up when you're looking through it. However, if you have a fixed f-stop in your eye, you'll be delighted to know that you could still look through this thing and not really lose that much light transmission at higher magnifications. Here at 25x, the image almost looks exactly as it did when we first got behind this thing at 5x. Unfortunately, again, though, you do not have a fixed f-stop in your eye, so at this magnification, it'll be much more challenging to get behind. Just know that this thing does have pretty damn good light transmission. All right, ladies and gentlemen, or should I say like one lady and multiple gentlemen, let's get into some side-by-side comparisons. On the left will be the PST, clearly labeled on top, and on the right is going to be our first competitor, which is going to be the Bushnell XRS3. Why am I including this 6-36 by 56 first focal plane Japanese-made HPVO? Well, because I wanted to give you some perspective for the next comparison. Just because you have more magnification or a scope made in Japan doesn't necessarily mean it's going to perform better in every single way, shape, and form. Optically, I was not a big fan of the XRS3. The image always seemed milky and cloudy to me, and it just never had the same sort of impactfulness. It also had a much smaller view looking through it, which is something I haven't touched on yet, because the PST looks friggin' huge when you get behind it. It's literally as good as a Gen 2 Razor HD, which is just about as big as you can get, but yet it still has a decent level of resolution. Typically, when you have a smaller view looking through a scope like the XRS3, Not necessarily the XRS3, because the resolution on that does not seem anywhere near as high as it should be, given its price, which is $700-ish more expensive than the Vortex, or its weight. It's about 9 ounces heavier, but it just doesn't perform anywhere near as good as it should. Namely, it's even got a smaller exit pupil, but that's because the magnification range is higher. It's got 8.5 at the minimum, which is really small, and 1.6 at its maximum. That is very, very, very small. But it does have longer eye relief, 4 inches as opposed to 3.4, but that's not enough to save it against the PST. The PST is the clear winner, considering that both these basically have the exact same feature set otherwise, with the exception of magnification range. There's no real comparison. This next comparison, however, is probably going to be the most impactful, because these two are as close to head-to-head as you can get, even though they don't have the same feature set. I'm of course talking about the Bushnell Match Pro ED. This is a 5-30 by 56 first focal plane scope with locking windage and elevation turrets. This comes in at more, as near as makes no difference, about the same street price as the PST Gen 2, if not a little bit less expensive. Bushnell actually just recently ran a sale on most of their products online, and the Match Pro ED was one of them. They come in typically around $700, but you can find them cheaper than that. The M ped is only about a ½ inch shorter than the PST, but it's got a much larger tube. Despite that, though, it's only about a ½ ounce heavier than the PST, which is pretty impressive. As far as the field of view is concerned, the M ped actually has a little bit more down low, 24.5 feet versus 24.1, but up top it's a little bit tighter, but that could be from the extra 5x, 4.1 versus 4.8 respectively. Now, I could not find any exit pupil information for the M ped for whatever reason, so that's kind of a moot point, but I will say, to my eye, the M ped is much easier to get behind, and part of that has to do with the fact it's got a longer eye relief, 3.8 inches. But despite the fact it's got a longer eye relief, it still has the same monstrous view looking through it. Now, one reason to get one versus the other might be reticle option, it might be price, it might be the feature set. I love having locking turrets. The M ped has that. But again, another thing to take into consideration is where these are made. The PSTs are made in the Philippines, the M ped is made in China. Looking at them side by side here, they might look very similar, and that's because they were filmed on the exact same day. That's right, I've been holding this off for quite some time. I will say, though, that at the higher magnifications, the M ped does have a little more chromatic aberration that creeps in, but resolution and sharpness-wise, they're both really, really, really close. Colors, I think I'd actually give it to the M ped. It just seems a little bit better to my eye. Again, on camera, it might not pick up all the same information, but truth be told, ladies and gentlemen, both of these function extremely, extremely well. Depth of field, as far as what's in focus more often, I will give to the PST. The M ped's a little bit more shallower, but some people prefer that, some people don't like that. What else could I really say? They're about the exact same length at 15.8 and 15.4 inches, again, respectively. And these two really are some of the best budget options out there. Who do I recommend what for? Well, if you're just getting new into the game, the M ped is something that completely blew me away. So much so that I've contemplated selling my PST to buy one, but then what fun would that be? So I'm just going to wait for a good used deal on an M ped to snag one up, because the PST, just like I said in the M ped review, is still a very viable option and competitor against the M ped, because if you're building a trainer, and you don't want to spend Razer HD levels of money, but you want to have similar-ish controls and similar reticles, then the PST is the clear winner here, because you're going to have a trainer and a purpose-built precision professional rifle, let's say. Whereas the M ped could fit that role either which way. The M ped really doesn't have the XRS sibling that it needs to be the trainer for, but I have not finished reviewing all of the Bushnell DMR series yet, so hopefully one of those will come into play. But between these two, flip a coin, ladies and gentlemen. My next comparison is going to start a trend, because I'm going to be comparing the PST against other Vortex products real quick for your enjoyment. The next is going to be the Razer LHT 4.5 to 22 by 50. This thing comes in significantly lighter. You're talking about 10 ounces lighter. Comes in a couple $100 more, roughly $1,500, but you can, again, find them on sale. A little bit shorter, 13.3 as opposed to 15.8. The field of view, despite the fact that it's got smaller magnification, is going to be well, smaller, unfortunately. 23.5 feet to 4.7 versus the PST's 24.1 to 4.8. And that probably has to do with the eye relief. As you might have guessed, the LHT has a much larger eye relief of 4 inches as opposed to 3.4, and that really does play dividends. The farther away it is, the smaller it's probably going to be, unless you have some voodoo black magic going on. But again, the LHT is a light hunter tactical. It's designed to fill 2 specific roles, something that the PST can absolutely do as well, but in a much lighter, more streamlined package. It does have push-button illumination, which I'm not the biggest fan of, but it does keep the cost kind of down, and it does keep the simplicity down as well, even though cycling through a push-button illumination sort of sucks as opposed to a rotary dial, but different strokes for different folks. As far as the view looking through them, you can clearly see the PST is much larger, but again, the eye relief does play against the LHT in this role. Image on the LHT is very sharp and clear. There is some chromatic aberration, some purple fringing that comes up with it, but it's kind of few and far between. It's only in the really high contrast areas, which again could be completely by design for hunters. Now, the XLR2 reticle found in the LHT might not be for everybody, and unfortunately that's basically the only reticle option you really have. It's nowhere near as flexible as opposed to the PST or the other Razor scopes in the lineup. As far as other statistics I can tell you guys, well, there isn't a whole lot on paper. Just know that the Razor is much lighter and much nicer to look through. The exit pupil is a little bit larger, but not by much. At its minimum, it's 11.1 and its maximum 2.2, but that basically correlates perfectly in line with the slightly lower magnification range. So not really that impressive. But again, with the larger or longer eye relief, it does help make a little bit more sense. Colors, contrast, and sharpness-wise, they're actually both very close. The main reason why you'd go with one versus the other is probably the capped windage on the LHT and the locking elevation, which I'm a big fan of. But again, you go for its lighter weight and the fact that it's made in Japan, not in the Philippines. But honestly, I'd rather have a good Filipino-made scope than a mediocre Japanese one or even a good Chinese one, personally. But again, that's my personal preference, maybe not yours. Both of these perform extremely well in their own rights, but which one is more tactical? I'd have to give it to the PST, despite the fact the LHT has literally tactical in its name. It is capable of fulfilling that role, but these are the only 2 30mm scopes that we're looking at today, so that is another factor to roll in. You can offset that with an offset mount, a canted mount, 15, 20, 10 MOA, anything. Anything is better than running 0, especially if you're running out of elevation. But both of these basically are very different and unique. So, as far as which one I would prefer or recommend, you got to find the one that's going to fit your role better. You know, see, you're 100% correct. I want a little bit more features as opposed to what the LHT offers or even the PST. What else is there in the Vortex lineup? Well, there's actually a bunch of other stuff. The next up is going to be the Strike Eagle. This is a 5 to 25 by 56 first focal plane HPVO. Features a 34mm tube, so a little bit larger tube is going to allow you for a little bit more adjustability on the elevation. Comes in a little bit less expensive at a normal street price if you're buying these new and used for that matter. A couple $100 less expensive than the PST. As far as the length, it's a little bit shorter than the PST, about an inch shorter. Weight-wise, you're talking about a couple ounces heavier at 35 ounces. The biggest thing is going to be the field of view. It's actually exactly the same. Or is it? No, it is. 24 feet at its minimum, 5.2 at its maximum, as opposed to 4.8 for the PST. So here at 180 yards at 25x, yeah, there's a little bit of a difference. The exit pupil, though, is going to be where the biggest factor comes into play. It's at least 10% larger. 11.2 at the minimum, 2.24 at the maximum, as opposed to 10 and 2. The eye relief is also a little bit larger. It's 3.66 inches as opposed to 3.4. And despite the fact that the scope's actually farther from your eye, you have the exact same view looking through it. They're both very large. Now, as far as optical clarity goes, I might actually still give it to the PST. The Strike Eagle does have some chromatic aberration that does pop up. So there is that, but it does have really nice locking turrets, which is a bit of an in-between from the Razor to the PST. They're really nice, all things considered. Between these two, which one would I go for? It almost comes back down to which one do you want on your trainer? If you're building a trainer, then you could split hairs between one being Chinese, one being Filipino. One's got lock and turrets, one doesn't. Glass-wise, I will give it to the PST, but the Strike Eagle isn't that far behind, all things considered, and it is less expensive. So it's going to come down to what options you want. But truth be told, if you're buying one of these as an individual product, I would also include the Match Pro ED again on this, because it's going to be even less expensive than the Strike Eagle, offer better features, better magnification, and just be better overall. You might not have been expecting that answer, but guess what? Truth hurts sometimes. The Match Pro ED really does slap hard, and if you're going to have one scope to do it all, and you're looking to save as much money possible doing it, the Match Pro ED is very hard to beat. But let's say you want to save even more money and you're willing to give up locking turrets. Well, the Vortex Venom is another option. This is again a 5-25 by 56 first focal plane HPVO with a 34mm tube. These things regularly come in at around $500, but you could find them for much less money than that. Length on this is a little bit longer than the Strike Eagle. It's almost 3/4 of an inch longer. And it is heavier. It's about 4 ounces heavier, but that could just be to the fact that it's using lesser expensive materials and thus might go up in weight a little bit. Field of view is smaller. At its minimum, 21.2 feet versus 24, but at its maximum, they're about the same, 4.7, 4.8. And the eye relief is a little bit larger, it's 3.6, but as you can see, the view looking through it is much smaller than the PST and smaller than the Strike Eagle. As far as the exit pupil, it's claimed to be about the exact same as the Strike Eagle, but I don't know how true these numbers are because you can't really just find them anywhere. The only place I could find the exit pupil on all these Vortex products was actually on Optics Planet, so I don't know how much I trust them and their numbers, but Vortex does not list them. As far as my experience behind all of these, I would say they're pretty comparable to one another, so I would say those numbers aren't too far off. The Venom does offer some really nice controls, albeit non-locking ones, so if you are looking for a simpler scope to throw on a trainer and save some money, because you can find the Venoms for like the $400 price point, it's a pretty damn compelling argument. If you really don't want to spend the money to step up to a PST, a Strike Eagle, or an MPED, the Venom is another option out there for you if you want to stay in the Vortex family. If not, Arkin's got some really nice options, as does Athlon. There's actually a lot of different variables out there, but I wanted to make this really about the PST and the heritage and the bloodline, about what you could really get for the money, whether you're going for lesser expensive, like what we've seen with the Strike Eagle and the Venom, or a little bit more expensive like we've seen with the LHT, or our final comparison of the day with the Razer HD Gen 2 4.5-27. These are the granddaddy of them all, and have significantly gone up in price since the start of COVID. You were able to find these things for like $2,000 or less. Now they're like $2,500, which is ridiculous to consider the Gen 3 6-36s were about that price like a year and a half ago. It really is just trying times. As far as what you could expect from the Razer HD, well, it's a 4.5-27 by 56 in first focal plane with, again, a 34mm tube. Price is very expensive. Weight is very heavy, just about 50 ounces, so significantly heavier than what you find in the PST. Overall length is a little bit short, about 14.5 inches, but its field of view is massive. At minimum, 25.3 and 4.4 at the maximum. So, honestly, not too far off from what the PST has to offer. As far as the exit pupil, though, again, these numbers might be slightly skewed, but it's significantly larger, 12.4 and 2.07 respectively, and the eye relief's a little bit farther at 3.7. Which one of these would I buy with my own money? Well, if you already have a Razer HD Gen 2, you might as well pick up the PST to have that trainer combo like I said. It's really nice being able to go from one to the other and have similar-ish controls that you are familiar with, as well as reticles that are exactly the same. What's the point of having a trainer if you can't actually train with the damn thing? But if you're looking for a scope that you can take off your firearm and bludgeon someone to death with, the Razer HD Gen 2 should be considered. They are heavy, they are big, but they offer really, really nice features, wonderful controls, and really do offer that second kind of cool that you just can't explain. You just enjoy using it all the time. So, take that for what it's worth. Are they worth $2,500? I don't really think so, but keep an eye out for good sales or used. Getting into my final thoughts. I applaud you for making it as far as you have, about 40 minutes on my scale right here, right now, and God only knows how long it's going to take me to actually get my final thoughts out. My brain just sort of wanders and works oddly, I'll say. Yeah, I don't really write anything down. I just go with the flow. And the flow is, the PST is still a wonderful scope. It's got its problems. We saw that earlier with the tracking test. It's just 2% above 5 mils. But again, serving size of 1. It could very simply have just been an issue with my scope in particular, or maybe it's an issue across the board. I won't know unless I was to track multiple units. Optically, they are still very, very good. Despite the fact they only have a 50mm front objective and a 30mm tube, these things still perform quite well in almost every single way, shape, and form. Reticle options are great. The illumination is great. The controls are great. As long as you don't mind the feature set that it has and you're not wanting for more, you would be hard-pressed to find a better option than the PST still. If you want more options, there are other scopes out there, and I've made that as painfully clear as possible. I think I did, like 5 comparisons, which is the most I've done in any video review so far. Do I like the PST still? I do. It's served its role extremely well, and all of the PST Gen 2 lineup, with the exception of the 2-10, I find to be perfect. The 2-10, I've never reviewed. I've gotten my hands on one for a very short amount of time, and it just didn't excite me. The fact that it's as heavy as it is, it's like 30-something ounces. The fact that it's got no locking turrets on a scope that is, in my opinion, designed to be used in a more general purpose role is a real letdown. I also don't really like the reticle options that Vortex offered with that thing, so that's why I never got my hands on one of them to review, or proactively went out there and bought one used, which is typically the case on this channel. The 1-6 though is phenomenal. The 3-15 is phenomenal, albeit I choose the Meopta Optica 6 over that. As far as this 5-25, would I buy this if I had to buy just one scope? I'd probably opt for the Match Pro ED. The controls on it are a little bit better suited for what my needs and purposes are, but that might not fall in line with what you need and want out of your high-powered variable optic. If you are completely new to this, what would I recommend or suggest? Well, if you're going to be shooting from a bench and from stable positions more frequently, just looking to engage targets downrange, and you want something that still performs really good, that you could find used for about the same price that you can buy the M-Head for, I'd recommend probably the PST. It's got wonderful controls, wonderful glass, and it's a very nice experience overall. But I'd still probably pick the M-Head over this. It's just got that little bit extra edge when it comes to the view looking through it. It's got a little bit larger eyebox. It's got a more forgiving experience when you get behind it. I actually really like the reticle in that. It's just a better overall fit for me. Again, though, if you don't want to buy something that's made in China, you don't think you need the locking turrets, the PST Gen 2 is still very hard to beat for the price despite its age. Keep an eye on some used forums on eBay, on Gunbroker, on Reddit, and you will find them for like the $500 to $600 price point, which is extremely compelling. If you were to factor in also the warranty, Vortex has an amazing warranty, probably one of the best in the business, but a lot of people will say that you don't have the warranty for if you need it, you have it for when you need it. You are going to need to use their warranty. And that comes in light with the recent turret debacle of the Gen 3 6-36s. Apparently, a lot of them have been having failures with their turrets. I don't know if it's the original turrets that came with the 6-36s or the revamp. I'm not 100% sure on that. Does it suck? Yes, it really does suck. But at least you know you have a company that's going to stand behind their product to at least do what they need to do to make you happy, even if it's give you a refund. I've heard of instances of that in the past as well. So, the PST Gen 2, still a great scope. It's not without its flaws. It's not without its quirks. It's not without its dated features, but it's still something that I will proudly have on my shelf, use in comparisons from here on out, and throw on one of my practice rifles to enjoy from time to time. So, with that, A huge thank you for all of you for staying tuned for this long of a video. I had a lot to say about it because there's a lot to be told about the PST. It's been something that's been floating around on Baggaras for the last 10 years, it feels like. And I have a funny feeling you'll still continue to see these things mounted on Baggaras for years to come. So, thank you all very much for watching. And as always, see you again next time. And a huge thank you to my Patreon providers and my Subscribe Star subscribers. Without you, this truly wouldn't be possible. If you'd like to support my channel but don't want to join either of those, I completely understand. But you could still help by using my affiliate links in the description below, and or like, share, and subscribe as always. Again, thank you very much.